You've returned, the halfling near the gate observed, handing off a basket of herbs to an elderly tiefling woman. I would say welcome back, but... You're very precise, I understand, Simon remarked. It was the most polite thing he could think to say about how the druid spoke of outsiders coming to the grove. If he was the one who they sent to receive guests... My stock has been refreshed, as it were, although much of it is what the refugees are casting off ahead of their journey. Perhaps it will be of more use to you? He offered. Oh, by all means. See what we can use. Go on, mix, mingle, Simon said casually to the group before turning back to the halfling. I know what will be of most use to me, though, is information. We require the services of a healer, urgently, Simon began, keeping his tone as neutral as he could. He was in no position to make demands, and this man was in no position to make promises. The skills and magics at my group's disposal are insufficient to cure this ailment. Do you know of anyone here who may be willing and able to help us? The halfling considered his words for a moment, his brows knit. Our first druid, Halsin, is a very skilled healer, but unfortunately he departed the grove a few days ago with the lot you rescued at the front gate, and, well, as I'm sure you've noticed, he did not return. He left Korga in charge, and between this refugee encampment, Halsin's disappearance, that ship crashing nearly on our doorstep, and the attempted theft of our holy idol, she has decided to seal the grove. I can't say I blame her. It's quite a lot to deal with, and certainly not something Halsin could have forewarned her about. Indeed, I can certainly sympathize, Simon nodded. Unfortunately, Korga is not a healer, but Halsin's apprentice is in the inner sanctum, in the infirmary. She's your best bet until Halsin returns. You believe he's alive? Simon asked, his brows lifting slightly. Halsin is a powerful druid who knows these lands well. While a goblin warband might overcome a group of soft-skinned city dwellers like them, he would not be such easy prey. Besides, he dropped his voice and Simon leaned down to conspire. If those goblins are half as organized as the prisoner says, they will have taken Halsin hostage. I'm expecting every sound I hear beyond the gate to be a messenger come to offer terms. Just another point in favor of closing the grove, unfortunately. Hang on. You have a prisoner? Simon asked, his tone hushed. Yes, a loud goblin. Keeps agitating the tiefling, she does. Perhaps we'll have a word with her, Simon murmured. We've heard talk of a goblin encampment in the area. If we can find it soon enough, we might be able to bring word of Halsin. Please do. While I think the rite is a wise move, it's not a ritual I'm familiar with. It makes me uneasy, the halfling admitted softly. But these are unsettling times. Perhaps once all this is blown over, in 10 or 20 years' time, we can revisit the decision. As they quickly discovered, there were dozens of refugees who needed shelter and passage to Baldur's Gate, a logistical nightmare. Moreover, they were mostly civilians. More than a few children were with them, and most had little more than the clothes on their backs. Were Simon back home, he could have easily handled the matter. He'd simply pass the question to Rathburn, his quartermaster. But without the old sergeant's expertise, Simon was at a loss. There was little he could do besides offer gold and encouragement. Which, to Astarion's annoyance, he seemed intent on doing for every tiefling they came across. Everyone got a bit of gold, a shoulder to cry on, an ear to hear their sob story. At this rate, they'd be here until the tentacles burst from their faces, or at least until Simon ran out of coin and his newfound friends found less use for him. As Simon perused the wares of a tiefling child, Astarion's gaze flitted about. His ears pricked to the subtle movements around him. How could Simon be so naive to focus his attention on the obvious charlatan in front of him that he had already caught in a con? Nobles! The easiest of marks, even when they were staring right at you. Sure as anything, a red-skinned tiefling child crept up behind them, her tail flicking with nervous energy as she reached for Simon's pockets. Astarion watched, waiting with predatory patience to see if the child would think better of pickpocketing such well-armed marks, or if she had the self-awareness to know she was being watched, either by guards or bigger fish in the pond. As tiny fingers slowly started withdrawing from the coin purse, Astarion spun to face the child, catching her wrist in his cold grip, and holding her hand high over her head, nearly jerking her off her feet. A pair of incriminating gold coins were still clutched in her grasp. "What have we here? A thiefling," Astarion sneered. "Caught red-handed. Seems to be a lot of that going around here lately."
"Let me go!"
the child cried, twisting and squirming. "Now what shall we do with you?" he smirked. "Back in my day, I sentenced petty thieves to lashings for every coin over a silver slip. But I hear the punishment for theft around the grove is a good deal more severe. Your hand, perhaps? Or your head?" "Astarion, that is enough," Simon said, his expression firm. "Release her." "Oh, come now. How is the child to learn either not to steal or not get caught without consequences?" Astarion asked, the puckish glee in his eye undeniable as she sniffed and began to whimper. "Your honor has made his opinion known, but we are beyond his jurisdiction. Return my property and I shall consider the matter closed," Simon decreed with a deep, authoritative tone, holding out his hand for the coins. In that moment he was very much Lord Fontdale, rather than Simon the Wizard they had all come to know over the past few days. His signet ring glinted in the late morning sun, a subtle reminder of his authority. Astarion dropped his arm with a sigh and plucked the purloined coins from the child's grasp. "Very well, my lord," he said, slapping them into Simon's open palm. "I cede my judgment to your clemency," he growled. He did not release the girl's wrist, however, leaning down to her level. "Count your blessings, thiefling. Next time there won't be a sympathetic lord or patriarch to save your hide." "He's not wrong, child. Baldur's Gate will be much less forgiving than I." "Now go," Simon said, depositing one coin in Mattis's hand and the other in the thief's, pointedly ignoring Astarion's incredulous gaze. "But if we catch your fingers near our purses again, I'll let him do as he pleases," Simon added, jerking his head in Astarion's direction. Tears in her eyes, the child yanked her hand free from Astarion's loosening grip and ran, sobbing loudly. "Now, if your punishment for thieves is giving them what they've taken, I wonder how I'm to be punished," Astarion chortled, holding up Simon's coin purse. Simon's eyes widened as his hands flew to his belt and pockets in disbelief. Mattis, too, watched Astarion with awe. "Do keep sharp, darling. You're such an easy mark," Astarion smirked, tossing his purse back to him. "And who in the world is going to catch me?" Guys, you'll never believe this!" Karlach cried, gingerly stepping around Mattis's little corner of the encampment. "The blacksmith here. I was just talking to him. He was indentured to an infernal mechanic in Avernus. He's going to take a stab at my engine." She gasped, flames jumping from her exhaust ports in excitement. "Can you believe it? I'm going to be okay," she laughed. "It's really going to be okay." "Of course it is," Simon smiled, restraining himself from giving her a small hug. She seemed on the verge of tears. "The very threads of fate shifted for you, Miss Cliffgate. They're not about to snap and let you fall." "Oh, you're a sweetheart," she sniffed, grinning. "We'll need to find him some infernal iron, though. Reckon after flying through Avernus there might be some random Nautiloid wreckage. Maybe some poor devil got squished and his armor's free for the taking now, who knows?" "By all means, please keep an eye out. I'll do all I can for it as well. Simon nodded.
Make way! Make way!
A pair of tieflings stormed past and down a sweeping staircase hewn roughly from the stone itself, toward a small knot of agitated refugees outside the stone arch leading into the druid's sacred pool. The small crowd parted for them, anxious.
Let my daughter go right now! The woman spat.
She is a thief, Hellspawn, and you will wait for Kagha's judgment. Now get back! One of the druids guarding the outer sanctum commanded with a snarl. The tiefling woman let out a matching growl of frustration.
Let me through, Magrissim, or I'll rip your damn throat out!
With a roar and a flash of golden-green primal magic, a rather lanky-looking druid transformed into a hulking grizzly bear, lips curled with a roar. The small group of tieflings quickly retreated at the display, though the woman at the front had to be dragged away by her husband. Simon frowned. The tension certainly wasn't dispersing as quickly as the crowd.
Damn it!
The woman growled through gritted teeth, pacing a few steps back and forth.
We could have taken those guards.
He turned into a bear, Chimera. Be realistic, her husband pleaded. I could try to grease some palms, ease things over.
Oh, because they'll want to deal with us,
she snapped, letting out a frustrated sigh.
We need to get Arabella out now.
You heard them. They're waiting on Kagha to give word.
I'd sooner trek back through the 9 hells than trust that snake.
The woman, Chimera, spat. Pardon me. We couldn't help it over here, Simon said, approaching the pair. Your daughter's being held. Yes, the man sighed. She tried to steal their idol. Druids lost their damn minds. They need it for their ritual.
It's all my fault,
Chimera said, her shoulders drooping slightly.
I said I wished the wretched thing would just disappear, or better yet, explode.
And now Arabella's being judged by a bunch of druids who hate us. It's not right. So she tried to steal a holy relic in broad daylight, Astarion remarked. She sounds like a treat. I admire the ambitious spirit of these tiefling children, but they leave much to be desired on the execution.
Gods, please don't say that word,
Chimera said, the anxiety tightening her voice. Perhaps this calls for an impartial third party to arbitrate, Simon offered. I can try speaking with them, and I happen to know a magistrate, he smirked. Oh, now you want my judgment, Astarion scoffed, though Simon couldn't help but notice him preen a bit under the attention. We may need your expertise, yes, Simon replied. Everyone wait here, he said, descending the stairs and approaching the guards with his hands open in a gesture of peace. You! Get back! The druid from before said, hand on her quarterstaff. Please, I'm not looking for trouble, Simon said, hands raised. I was told that Halsin's apprentice is a healer. I seek her services, he began. Perhaps if we can help the situation with these refugees. No outsiders are welcome. Kagha's orders. If it weren't for those outsiders, this place would be overrun by goblins. Have some respect, one of the nearby tieflings yelled. You stay out of this. Force our hands and you'll see their claws. Wait, Jorna, a moment, a gnome druid at her side said softly. The pair retreated, but the bear remained quite present, his hot breath huffed unpleasantly into Simon's space. What? Oh, very well. You there. You're the ones that fought at the gate? Apparently Kagha wants to see you. You may enter, but do not linger. Simon nodded and offered a light, courteous bow, waving the others up after him. Everyone, we've been summoned by the new first druid, he explained, ushering everyone past the bear before whispering among them. Some of us ought to stay out here and keep things from boiling over, though, he said. Do our best to make a good impression. Even if we can't necessarily build bridges, we can at least work on putting out the fires on the ones that are burning, Agreed, Gale nodded. and I certainly wouldn't mind observing this ritual if they'll permit it. I think I'm sufficiently non-threatening in appearance to be allowed, don't you?" "Hopefully," Simon replied, glancing at the others. "Yes, perhaps you and Lae'zel could stay here and keep an eye on things. I trust your combined physical and mental prowess," he said.
Lae'zel said nothing, but narrowed her eyes first at Simon, then at Gale, sizing up the wizards for a moment.
"Do keep one another out of trouble, won't you? And Will, you seem to have an excellent rapport with the tieflings already. Would you be so kind as to perhaps remain here and do the talking?" Simon asked, his voice dropping. "While I trust their strength and knowledge, I don't necessarily trust either of them to keep the anger up here from rising above a simmer," he murmured. "I'll certainly do my best," Will said, flashing a winning smile. "Good. Then the rest of you with me, please," Simon said. "Astarion, if there's any call for an impartial judge, Karlach, should we need muscle, and Shadowheart, if we must explain the need for more advanced healing and what courses of action we've already taken."
Several druids undulated and prayed around a beautifully carved depiction of Sylvanus the Oak Father, his wild beauty captivating. Simon could hardly imagine a child being able to steal such an object. It was about the size of a toddler and was clearly observed by all in the grove. Something didn't seem quite right to Simon as he led the others toward the carved doors to the inner sanctum, stepping carefully around a menagerie of wild animals. Or what he assumed were wild animals. Any number of these squirrels or jays or boars or bears could be yet more druids. The stone door of the inner sanctum slid open on delicately balanced hinges, hardly demanding any effort at all from Simon beyond his intention to enter. Fine bit of magic, it seemed. The gentle sound of an underground spring met his ears as they descended the stone steps into the dark, the scent of moss and minerals greeting them. A voice, too. A child's.
I'm sorry! I'm sorry!"
A young girl whimpered. She was flanked by two druids who seemed to be paying her little mind, and a viper that was in turn paying very close attention to her, its tongue flicking in her direction and its dry, ridged scales scraping harshly against each other as it coiled, ready to strike.
"Please, I'm sorry,"
she begged.
"This is madness, Korga. She's just
A what, Wrath? A thief? A poison? A threat?" the red-haired druid asked, though her tone implied more of a statement than a question. Simon could already tell her mind was made up. The man across from her, however, seemed equally adamant in his protest. "I will imprison the devil, and I will cast out every stranger," she continued, her gray-green eyes flicking to Simon and the others with her declaration. A fine greeting for one she apparently wanted to speak to.
"Imprison the devil?" Simon asked, his tone soft. "She's a child."
"She is a parasite," Korga snapped. "She eats our food, drinks our water, then steals our most holy idol in thanks." The viper hissed, echoing the woman's sentiment in its body language. "Wrath, lock her up. She remains here until the rite is complete," she ordered, looking to her counterpart, who seemed unwilling to follow her order. "And keep still, devil. Tila is restless," Korga added, her gaze flicking to the viper, its fangs bared in threat. Simon folded his hands in a mendicant gesture, though mostly to hide how he clenched his fist. It was people like this who gave snake familiars a bad reputation, why people distrusted little Mortimer, who wouldn't hurt a fly. "Come, Korga. We took back the idol, surely." "Do it!" she snapped, her patience clearly wearing thin. Simon frowned as he prodded gently at the edges of Korga's mind, while her attention was focused elsewhere. He felt an overwhelming desire for authority, to be obeyed. It was a feeling he was very familiar with, one he'd lived under his entire life. But Korga, he could tell, was grasping at power that wasn't hers, trying to fill much bigger shoes. She had something to prove, and little plan for how to do so. First Druid Korga, Simon began, noting how her gaze snapped to him and how her lips turned when he addressed her with what was, in her mind, her proper title. As it so happens, we have one versed in matters of justice and law, and another practiced in diplomacy and leadership. If you make your case, perhaps Magistrate Ancunin and I can offer you counsel and pass judgment, he said, carefully massaging her ego as Astarion stepped forward, standing tall at Simon's side. Very well. I'll defer to your ruling, she began. My circle has offered grace to these outsiders. We gave them shelter from storm. We nourished their bellies. In return, these devils lured in a horde of goblins, and their spawn stole the one relic that might keep us safe.
The tieflings didn't lure in the goblins. Those adventurers traveling with that other druid did.
Simon recognized the voice as Astarion's, at least mostly, and his gaze flicked over to the other elf. His face was impassive, the practiced mask of neutrality worn by all magistrates in their work.
And the druid, Halsin, went with them willingly. That was no fault of the refugees,
Simon thought as well.
Oh! My, I didn't realize I was thinking quite that loudly.
We've taken back our relic, Korga continued, oblivious to the mental conversation happening just in front of her. But I will keep the fiend caged till our protection rite is complete.
And you, little one, Arabella, isn't it? Simon said, looking down at the trembling tiefling girl with a fatherly smile. Why did you try to take the idol?
I was scared,
the girl said, looking up at him with pleading eyes.
They said when the ride is over we'd have to leave. But there's goblins out there, and worse. And it's nice here, so I took the idol. I thought maybe then we could stay. Please let me go. I'll be good, I swear.
Well, Magistrate, what say you?
If she's imprisoned or harmed, the tieflings outside will riot. I'm perfectly capable of delivering a ruling on this, my lord. Her reasoning was childish but honest. She lacks the proper mens rea to convict, though she knows stealing is wrong, Astarion said, glancing at the girl as if to confirm she did indeed know such a thing. And though we might find an adult in this situation culpable for her negligence, she did so without malice, fraudulence, or corruption. In essence, she was acting in self-defense. Furthermore, you admit the idol was recovered, so compensatory damages are unnecessary, Astarion said, turning to Simon. And you don't want the tieflings to remain, or be anywhere near your inner sanctum, Simon continued, gesturing to the room around them. Holding her here will only raise tensions further. We nearly saw a fight break out at the archway on our way in regarding this very thing. I understand the desire for justice, but temperance in this situation will show your wisdom, First Druid. The girl has been punished, and surely will be punished by her mother when she's returned to her, he said, his gaze flicking to Arabella. Keeping her would look like vengeance, meted out against a defenseless child. It appears weak, ma'am. Release her, but reiterate to the tieflings that they must go once the rite is finished. Show that this small wave will not topple you or change your course, he added. He wasn't pleased with the advice, but the allowance to Korga needed to be made to stay on anything resembling her good side. Korga spat something that sounded suspiciously like a swear before calling to the viper. The serpent looked disappointed as it closed its mouth and slithered away, but not before dragging its rough scales unpleasantly against Arabella's skin. Out, thief! My grace has its limits, Korga hissed, glaring down at the child. Arabella obeyed wordlessly, running up the stairs and past Shadowheart, who winced and cradled her hand. Simon wondered for a moment if the child's horn had caught her in her rush past. Thank you, Korga, Wrath sighed, smiling. Master Halsin would. Halsin isn't here, Korga spat. Keep his name off your tongue.
lest Tila pierce it, she threatened, her lip curled.
Roth sighed and backed away, apparently unwilling to turn his back on Kogha and her viper. She let out a huff, but did not seem to relax, casting a haughty look over at Simon. Go on. Say it. You think I'm a monster? Not a monster, no, Simon replied shrewdly. You were protecting your own. I'm familiar with being in such a scenario, he said, gesturing lightly to the group behind him. Sometimes we must make harsh decisions as leaders. First you urge peace, then you speak truth. You've surprised me twice over, Kogha said, a cold smile on her lips. A shame the grace period ends. The viper's fangs are bared. She must guard her brood. The idol has been recovered and the rite is resumed. We will seal the grove. Free from harm. Free from intruders. And this rite, Simon ventured. Forgive me, I'm not well versed in druidic magics. What will happen? When we speak the final prayer of the Rite of Thorns, the great vine will sprout forth. The grove will be cloaked in bramble and thorn. No one enters. No one leaves. Sanctuary. But none of this can happen while outsiders infect us. Sylvanus demands that we choke them out. You sentence them to death on the road, Simon stated, his tone neutral. Merely an observation, not a judgment. Not outwardly, anyway. I am First Druid now. I protect the circle, whatever the cost. But you showed great mettle at the gate. The mettle of a skilled sword for hire, Kogha mused. If their lives matter so much to you, then offer your services to the tiefling leader. Zevlor, he's called. Offer to guide the outlanders out of the grove. I'm sure they'll reward you well, she said, doing her best to tempt adventurers with what she knew of their desires. Forgive me, First Druid, but I'm not here seeking fortune. I'm here seeking a healer, Simon said, and I've been told there is one to be found here in the inner sanctum. You come here and pass your judgments, then make demands of me. Of course not, ma'am, Simon replied, averting his gaze in deference for a moment. If I parley with the tieflings, will you allow us to meet with your healer before we leave? Yes, Kogha replied after a moment of consideration. The outsiders must be gone before the final prayer. If they are not, the viper must strike. Well then, it seems I'd best speak with Zevlor, ma'am. Thank you for your time, Simon said, bowing lightly and turning away. Come along, everyone, let's not intrude any further, he said, doing his best to not sound patronizing. It wasn't until the door shut behind him that he relaxed, rolling his eyes. Oh, it took all I had not to just clobber her, Karlach growled, punching her fist into her palm. That makes two of us, Simon huffed. What an arrogant, selfish, weak-minded woman. And to threaten a little girl like that. Reprehensible, he snarled. Unfortunate that she's the one we must negotiate with. Gods. Seems we'd be doing this place a favor if she were to suffer some sort of accident, Astarion mused. No. It seems that man Roth would be the next in line. While he's compassionate, I'm not sensing a great deal of administrative talent from him, Simon remarked. And I don't particularly want to play kingmaker here. I just want to get rid of these worms and breathe easy. Pity, you seem quite good at it, Astarion remarked, casting his gaze around the sacred pool. Well, what's next on the docket? I'm just about out of patience for this place. Well, now we have to find where Zevlor's holed himself up and present him with Kogha's expectations, Simon sighed, slowly heading back toward the archway. I imagine I'm going to wear holes in my boots parleying for these two. The roar of a bear caught Simon's attention, the primal fear instilled by such a predator shooting down his spine into his stomach. Knowing there was a distinct possibility the bear was in fact a druid didn't remedy that at all.
Ah, yes. It was that Gur with 2 R's or with 1.
Simon frowned, his gaze focusing on the human standing before the bear, apparently oblivious to the potential danger. His clothing was outrageously peacock blue and most ill-suited to the environment, his hat perched jauntily atop his dark brown curls, and his mustache and beard carefully oiled and shaped. Simon swore he'd seen a similar visage somewhere before. "As I live and breathe, are you Volothamp Gedam?" Simon asked, an amused smile on his lips as he approached.
"Aha! The one and only!" the man replied, waving the end of his feather quill in Simon's direction.
"My tutors used to tear your books from my hands and chastise me for reading your work," Simon laughed. "He called it childish nonsense."
"Well, I never! As you can see, I travel the lands of Faerun extensively to bring secrets and lore from the far corners of the realms to my loyal readers."
"True, but they would say that doesn't disprove it from being childish nonsense." Simon smiled, his gaze flicking for just a moment to the somewhat crude rendering Volo had been scribing, showing a group of tieflings being dismembered by what he presumed to be the bear in front of him, an arm sticking out of the bear's mouth. It seemed Volo's talents with the pen were limited to words. "I still snuck your books into my chambers and read them by candlelight long into the night. I must admit, though, you're younger than I imagined."
"Adventure keeps the heart young. Now, if you please, you were one of the defenders at the gates, no? When the goblins came?"
"Indeed we were."
"A few questions, if you please," Volo cried. "How would you describe that particular batch of goblins? Size, nature, distinguishing qualities?"
Simon raised a brow, uncertain if batch was the proper collective noun for goblins, but was more than willing to humor the man. "I'd say the most unusual thing about them was their organizational structure. They seemed to be taking directions from someone above. One of the goblins was apparently captured alive and has been talking about being blessed by the Absolute. Seems there's a religious movement sweeping through goblin circles," Simon half lied. He gave a slight pause. "Huh. So this is exactly how Volo's works ended up being less than reliable."
"Ah, yes, I've spoken with her, much to the tiefling's irritation. She says they have abandoned Maglubiet in favor of this Absolute. This scandal."
"It is certainly unusual," Simon agreed, thinking back to the group they'd met on the road. The dead dwarven cleric, the tadpole in a jar back at their camp. It wasn't only goblins abandoning their traditional faiths.
"Unusual? My good fellow, there are so many more illustrative words to describe it. Abnormal, unorthodox, anathema, revolutionary, perhaps. In any case, I fully intend to get to the bottom of it. I'm preparing to head to their camp now, as we speak, according to the prisoner's instructions. I really ought to get underway, lest I be caught up here in this druid ritual."
"Indeed, we too are trying to conclude business here, see what can be done to help the refugees. I'm certain if such an esteemed writer as yourself were to mention their plight in the right periodicals, sympathetic ears in Baldur's Gate may be turned," Simon suggested, flashing a flattering smile. "It might not help with the journey, but for the city to welcome them with open arms after such suffering would be a balm, I'm sure."
"I don't normally take outside suggestions for my work, but given the events I'm chronicling currently, I shall consider it. But one final question. The dragon they had marching in the rear, was it of the brass or silver variety?"
"Dragon?" Simon blinked. There certainly was no dragon on either side of the skirmish. Things would have been quite different had there been.
"Witnesses failed to notice the obvious dragon," Volo narrated as he wrote. "No matter. Perhaps I can finagle some details out of the goblins. Oh, I knew those correspondence lessons in Goblin would come in handy," he cried, blowing quickly on the wet ink before snapping his journal shut. "If you'll excuse me, my friends, I've leads to follow."
"Well, this has certainly been a morning," Shadowheart remarked, watching as Volo hurried away, wrestling his pack onto his back as he traipsed toward the Grove's gate, past Gale and the others who gave him a wide berth.
To be almost torn apart by an owlbear, bear witness to a courtroom proceeding, and then meet a celebrity all before lunch.
Now that you mention it, lunch does sound good, Karlach remarked, though her brow knit slightly and she turned, burning eyes searching the space. Hang on. What's that sound? Do you hear it? Simon closed his eyes and listened. There was the quiet sound of the spring bubbling up into the sacred pool, the voices of a dozen druids chanting various protective spells around the very fine wooden idol of the Oak Father, the breeze coming across the river stirring the leaves of the trees, and faint threads of music.
Up there.
Shadowheart pointed toward a colorful tangle of silks among the rocks. Indeed, the occasional lute note caught on the ear.
Another bard?
Think so. Been listening this whole time. She could help ease tensions, Will remarked, already drifting toward a small, winding path up to the lip of the pool, the others following. Music hath charms to soothe the savage beast, after all. Its savage breast. Astarion smirked, watching Will's cheeks flush a bit darker at both the correction and its content. There was indeed a bard seated in the shade of the rocks, a tiefling with blueberry skin and hair she'd tinted mauve, but the soft strains of music continued even as her fingers stilled on her lute strings at the party's approach. Simon cast his gaze about for another player, but found nothing. Where's that music coming from?
I'm not sure, the young bard said. It's both inspiring and frustrating. The view, the music on the wind, the impending sense of doom, she sighed. Can't quite tell which part is my stumbling block, she added sarcastically.
Now, I'm sure with the right inspiration you could compose something just as lovely as yourself, Will smiled, sitting down opposite from the bard. Tch! He has done this all morning, Lae'zel complained, with every tiefling female who has looked his way. It is exhausting to listen to. Ah, let the boy have his fun, Gale smiled. It's cheering up the refugees, boosting morale. It is a nuisance. You lot handle that. I'm going to go look for that mysterious music, all right? Karlach laughed, clambering over rocks and down the cliff face with the energy and enthusiasm of an unusually large dog. She couldn't have been gone for more than a minute before Simon heard the scrabbling of her boots on stone again, though, and Karlach's head popped up over the rocks. Oi! Come quick! You're not going to like this.